Welcome to Tribal Economic Development, a podcast highlighting best practices for creating, implementing, and sustaining plans that lead to success in Indian country. We are Waséyabek, an economic development firm dedicated to creating a sustainable path forward for the Nottawasepi Huron Band of the Potawatomi. In our first 7 years of operation, we've grown from 0 revenue and 3 employees to more than $150 million in revenue and a team of more than 650. Along the way, we've learned many valuable lessons. Here, we'll share those lessons with you. And now, our hosts, Deirdre Mitchell, Waséyabek President and CEO, and Erica Weiss, Assistant General Counsel.
Hello, and welcome back for another episode of Tribal Economic Development. I am one of your hosts, Erica Weiss, here with my co-host, Deirdre. Hi, Deirdre. How are you?
I'm good. How are you doing, Erica?
Good. Who do we have here with us today?
We have Eric Henson, who is a citizen of the Chickasaw Nation, an adjunct lecturer at Harvard University, director of the Itapilla Program for Nation Building and Outreach, and a longtime research fellow and affiliate with the Harvard Project, and my friend.
Thank you. So glad to be here.
Welcome, Eric. I broke out my Harvard sweatshirt just for you today.
I see that. I wore the complimentary gear today.
I like it.
And I forgot my Harvard gear, so I'm behind the program.
Deirdre, why don't you tell us a little bit about why Eric's here today?
Eric invited me to lecture at Harvard on what Waséyabek is doing. And we follow the Harvard Project, and I think have a pretty good foundation based on that. And so it's been an interesting conversation with Eric and his students about that and, again, what we're doing. So I'm going to talk about that a little bit, and then we're also going to talk about a non-gaming economic impact study that we did here in Michigan with the tribes that collaboratively shows the progress that tribes have made over the last 5 years, and then the economic impact that they've had, not only to their own nations, but to the communities in which they operate.
Yeah, looking forward to talking about that. That was quite the undertaking that all 12 tribes in Michigan did this year. But Eric, we're so excited to have you here. Welcome.
I'm pleased. I've never been to Grand Rapids before. This is my first time in town.
Well, even better. Welcome to town then. So Deirdre obviously mentioned the Harvard Project, which we have talked about pretty much throughout the course of this podcast. And as Deirdre mentioned, is kind of the founding principles upon which Waséyabek was founded. Eric, why don't you tell us a little bit more? I know you weren't there for the creation of the Harvard Project, but you know very much about what the principles upon which it was founded. So why don't you talk to us a little bit about that?
Sure. So when I first heard of Waséyabek, I thought this is a very tangible, real-life example of people engaging in the kind of economic development that the pillars or principles of the Harvard Project speak to. Mm-hmm. And so I thought our students would really enjoy hearing that, particularly with the non-gaming side of it, like enterprise diversification and development. What does that look like on the ground? Mm-hmm. And talking to someone who was there from, 3 employees to through the process of the tremendous growth that the enterprises have had, mm-hmm. has been really rewarding. The foundation of the Harvard Project, I think, is kind of interesting. There were a couple of professors. I was a teenager at the time, so still in high school in Texas, actually. There was an economist and a sociologist, and they kind of looked around and said, it's interesting. Some tribes are really starting to take off and some aren't. Mm-hmm. And this was just before large-scale Indian gaming had really come to be, so mm-hmm. that's an interesting moment in time. And it wasn't apparent from sort of the economics playbook why that was happening. Mm-hmm. People kind of say, well, what are the inputs for development? Land, labor, capital. And those 3 ingredients, if you will, weren't really lining up with success, governmental success, community mm-hmm. success in all tribal settings. Mm-hmm. And so that was kind of interesting. And so these 2 gentlemen got in a car and drove around out west and started asking tribal leaders, what's working, what isn't working? Mm-hmm. And what they did in a certain way was systematically ask those questions, and we're able to synthesize the commonality of the answers. And they kind of landed on a few of these sort of principles or pillars. Yeah. And it sounds so obvious now, but it wasn't necessarily at the time, right? Sovereignty matters. Calling your own shots is really important. Culture matters. Having your development match the norms and cultural traditions that people see as legitimate, obviously that matters. Institutions matter. The word bureaucracy sometimes has a negative connotation, but governments need a working bureaucracy.
Right.
If something happens to your elected leadership, the office still needs to run the next day. The tribal water monitoring still needs to happen. All that stuff, right?
Yeah.
The institutions need to be stable and solid and well-funded, right? And of course, leadership matters. We see that with individual elected leadership that ends up being in place in certain places like my own tribe for decades. That stability, long-term vision, commitment to the community, that really matters. And so you've kind of got those 4 principles that seem to be common denominators for sustainable economic and cultural development.
And something Eric has said since I've known him that I really like, he said, we didn't write a book about you need to do this in Indian country to be successful. Like you said, they went out and talked to the tribes and said, what's working and why is it working? How is it aligning to create the right outcomes?
Right, and I actually applied to grad school at Harvard because I heard about this.
Okay.
And I kind of went, wow, there are 500 plus mini experiments going on what works for indigenous communities. And there's this research center there that talks about it. And I wanted to know more.
Well, and I think, like you said, now looking back, it seems very intuitive, right? These 4 pillars. And when you think about it, anybody could look at any government, whether it's tribal or not, and think that same thing, right? Because we're looking at individual sovereign nations, 500 plus individual sovereign nations, and what they're doing as a government, which is no different than what the United States or Australia or Germany or whatever, but just on a much smaller scale where you're seeing community impacts and individual impacts a lot more than what you would see on a larger, like, federal government level, for example, right?
Right, and we think some of these principles apply globally in indigenous communities, but only a couple of years before I was born, the federal government was still saying things like, the pace of development will follow as acculturation, and it was still this notion of like, if you guys would just join the American mainstream and jettison what makes you unique, then you'll be ready for sustainable development and success. And we found that that's just exactly opposite.
And that's why I love, to your point, Deidre, there's these pillars, right? But this is not a, hey, if you follow this roadmap, you're going to be successful. It's looking at these 4 pillars within the context of what your tribe is willing and able to do, the resources that they have available to them, and that phrase that we've talked about a lot on this podcast, strategic planning, and how that aligns then with each of those 4 principles, right?
Right. And what that implies is like, the uniqueness that people have. What is your measure of success? It might not be quarterly profits. It might be much broader than that. And in many Native communities, that's true. I mean, you need economic success and profitable enterprises so that you've got these resources that you can devote to your own priorities. That walks you right back into what these 4 principles are. You need to practice governance. You need to practice setting your own priorities. For far too long, tribal nations were denied the real opportunity to do that.
Right.
But once you've got that kind of decision making, you get to call your own shots, you get your own priorities, then you need those resources to devote towards them. Think about one thing that's just very important for nearly every tribal community is like language revitalization.
Yeah, it's a big one right now.
Languages pushed to near extinction, revitalizing them, particularly with small populations, is a massive undertaking. And for a long time, plenty of federal dollars flowed through Indian country, reservations, but all those dollars had descriptive mandates for what they were used for. And so if you want to spend just tens of millions of dollars a year on language revitalization, build a school for immersion for young children, these things cost a lot of money, and they're absolutely critical. Time is running out on some of the languages that we all desperately want to save.
So, Deidre, now I know that Waséyabek was aware of the Harvard project when you kind of came onto the scene, but what really inspired you about those 4 principles to want to really work with NHBP to get Waséyabek to where it is now based on those founding principles?
These are very applicable to Indian country, but they aren't exclusive to Indian country. So I'd worked with many businesses, I did consulting, and some of these same difficulties exist in other businesses. But they especially exist, I think, with tribes. And so I'd done consulting, worked with other tribes, and quite frankly saw a lot of things that didn't work. And so came across the study and read that, and I thought, okay, this is where it all came together for me. By the time I got here to Waséyabek, I had a pretty good idea of what I thought implementing this would look like. And as luck or bad luck would have it, the tribe had just gone through a not so successful business venture, and we're willing, love them for this, we're willing to look and go, okay, what didn't we do right? So we had a lot of conversations just starting out about the Harvard project and how that can be implemented and what are the things that we have to pay attention to. And like you said, they sound obvious, but they're hard to practice. Practice is the right word, because sometimes we get a little too far one way, a little too far the other way. We have to talk about it. Are we aligning where we said we're going to align? And is it serving the greatest and highest good?
And I really like, you mentioned, sometimes you go a little too far one way on one or multiple of these principles, right? And so I think the important thing to take away from is it's not a one size fits all across Indian country, but even within a tribe, it may not necessarily be a one size fits all when you're dealing with whatever business life cycle you were in for the principles still stand, right? But what you do with those principles is going to be different based on where you are at in the business life cycle for any economic development company.
Right. And I think, one thing to keep in mind is the commonality among the different Native nations was this long history of poverty and desperation and deprivation and land loss. And so once you start to get some success, you've got a whole lot of people who've got a long history of these economic and societal harms. And you don't, even when you start having some success, you don't necessarily have the resources to take on everything at once.
Right.
So you would expect in that setting fiercely internal debates about what those priorities should look like. Should we prioritize language revitalization? Should we prioritize upper educational access for high school graduates? Should we focus on environmental degradation on our reservation land? Should we focus on buying back those lands that we've lost? I mean, that's just barely scratching the surface of the list. And that mix is going to vary from place to place. Then you overlay the different size in terms of population and location and geography. You've got another layer of differentiation there. You've got different principles like the 7 grandfather teachings here that you want to kind of adhere to when you take on those debates. You've got sometimes outside leadership on the elected, not on the elected side, but on the enterprise side. And, knowing how to bring in that expertise you need if you don't have it in-house, and how you can use that expertise to bring up your internal capacity. Being an elected leader of a tribe seems to me to be about 1,000 different jobs at once. It seems very demanding. And
Lots of different hats.
Because we're coming from this history of sort of being denied that ability to really practice governance for generations, I think it's amazing and heartening how far many tribes have come. Still a long way to go in lots of places. But for the most part, many people now see this is the kind of playbook that you can operate within to enhance your chances of success.
And having your elected leaders, because leadership changes too over time, be committed to this is what we're doing, going back to that strategic plan. Everybody remain committed to that strategic plan and those principles. And that's not as easily done as it is said. And so continued discussion and how it applies in our moment of what we're doing.
I love even the example that you just gave, Eric, talking about, okay, what's our priority here? Even just talking through that, you touched on all 4 of those, right? Sovereignty, just the fact that you're asking the question of what are our priorities, you're exercising your sovereignty as a nation, right? What do we believe is the priority for us and what's best for our tribe and our tribal members at this point in time? Culture matters, right? You talked about, are we going to do, maybe success means language revitalization. Maybe success means that we're employing people. Maybe success is a number on a balance sheet, right? You're talking about that. You talk institution matters, how you're setting things up and what avenues you're going to explore based on the resources that you have in leadership, whether it's outside, inside, your tribal council, your membership. I mean, I love how that one example with what's just one question, you touch on all 4 of those foundational principles. And so it's interesting. You can certainly see how a tribe could take that and run that through your entire strategic planning process, right? And have that govern that.
Right. And one thing that I maybe sort of glossed over in terms of like the culture matters piece, that's even bigger than like what are we going to focus on as sort of our unique community. Some of the initial research was that your governmental forms align with sort of what people fundamentally believe is the right way of organizing yourself. That's like this incredibly important foundational aspect of being able to then build an economy and a society upon that foundation. The imposition of kind of generic IRA governments did not work with all Native people. Sometimes that aligned with kind of the notions that people like, okay, a strong executive and no judicial branch. But that clearly does not line up with like how people think they ought to be governed.
Yeah. And especially in tribes are very collaborative. They want to discuss things and understand things, and they make decisions as a group. And if you have an executive come in or anybody and they're like, look, it's got to be this way and it's got to be done by next week, and I need 3 people to decide, it just doesn't work. So understanding that culture is really vital to having success in Indian country, whether you're the tribe, whether you're a partner to a tribe, whether you're a community that a tribe operates within. Understanding that cultural piece is super important.
I'm sure you've dealt with that quite a lot, because it might be that, the speed of business in much of the sort of Western capitalist model is quick decision making and quick action, and how that intersects with sometimes a communal need for consensus might put your enterprise development at odds a little bit with sort of the community's idea of being on the same page. So I'm sure you've run across that.
Yeah, and it has to do with alignment and setting expectations. The first year that I was here was all about gaining alignment between all of the primary stakeholders. And then setting that expectation, because if you have this expectation that, well, here's a really common one. We have a casino, so you're going to perform like our casino does, right? Nope, we are really not going to. No, it's completely different. And so setting those expectations for, we do have a more collaborative process. We want to reach consensus before making major decisions. That takes time. That impacts the timeline. That impacts all these things. As long as everybody understands that and can remember that, that's what makes it successful.
And I mean, you mentioned success a couple of times too. That's part of the question you're trying to answer with these basic principles, right? Is what does success look like for the tribe? What might be, hey, we're diversifying our economy so that we can employ tribal members. What success means to that organization is a lot different than a company who is maybe focused on profits, or we're trying to make an environmental impact in a positive way in this direction, or whatever it may be, right? It's that definition of success that's, again, no one size fits all definition of success when it comes to tribes, or anyone really, but particularly when it comes to working with tribes.
Oh, for sure. Yeah. And I think, mundane questions of like, what sort of geographic footprint do we want our enterprises to be operating within? It's really important.
Yeah.
And I know that your enterprises have been quite adaptable over time. But that was like an important consideration early on.
Yes.
And then with some initial successes, there was sort of an easing of that sort of focus on the region right here.
That's very true. And there's many examples of that. And one of the really critical conversations that we had starting out was, is our main priority operating successful businesses from a profit standpoint, or is it to employ tribal members? And that's a very emotional discussion. And so the conclusion we came to, it's first operate profitable companies, because then we can employ tribal members. So when we first started, we just didn't have the capital or the bandwidth to really bring in some of our tribal members and start training them. But this last 2 or 3 years, we now are.
Yeah.
So that's changed over time. We know it's a really important initiative, but we had to do one before the other, and we had to stick to it to get to another point.
All right.
So I know a part of what you teach at Harvard is not just internally what these 4 principles look like, but then what impact a tribe that's using these principles to diversify their economy, what impact they have and what outreach they have within their larger communities outside of the tribe. Can you talk to me a little bit about just kind of that part of what you teach at Harvard?
Sure. So I focus a lot on experiential learning and like hands-on learning where we pair our students up with different communities. So a part of that for a particular community might be, how do we measure what we're really doing here? Other communities might reach out to us for something completely different. Like we're building a youth center. How do we measure success in the terms of like a youth clinic or whatever? Totally different. But generally, sort of this impact modeling is a whole field in economics that looks at kind of what you're up to basically, and asks the question of like, okay, what kind of impact are we having not just for our own employees in terms of dollars, revenues, wages paid, but how is that emanating out into the region or the county or, you know, some of these models use zip codes. You can kind of measure like if we're employing these people and paying them these wages, what is that doing indirectly for the economy in our area? And then furthermore, what's that doing for the economy in the region? And so there's some ways you can kind of actually measure that. And I know that you guys have done this twice in Michigan with the different tribes here in sort of a collaborative method. And that's one of the kind of things that our class could work with someone to help them think about whether they want to engage in that and whether they want to do it on an individual basis. How public do you want to make it? Is this for internal consumption because you kind of want to measure your own footprint in your part of the world? Or is it an outward facing, like we want to tout the benefits of the successes we're having?
Yeah.
And those are all legitimate questions that clearly fall under these, okay, if knowing that what this measurement looks like is important and on your priority list, then let's talk about how we want to use that internally or externally.
Yeah. Yeah, like you said, Waséyabek, along with NHBP, along with the other 11 tribes in Michigan, undertook this year to conduct a second economic impact study. I know one was done previously about 5 years ago, right, Deidre, in 2019. You kind of spearheaded it. Why don't you go ahead and talk to us about that study a little bit?
Well, it's interesting how it came about because we were having difficulties as a tribe, and all of the tribes in Michigan really, as being recognized as minority owned from the MMSDC here in Michigan. So a couple of leaders and I got together and we're like, okay, we need a game plan to kind of address this hurdle. And one of it was, well, we need to define what we do, how we add to the economy and what we do exactly, because most people who in Michigan at least think of tribes and they think of casinos. They don't even realize there's a whole other portfolio, full of businesses. So that's kind of how it came about. So I offered to lead that part of it. So in 2019, we got 9 of the 12 Michigan tribes together and did a non-gaming tribal economic impact study for the tribes in Michigan. Shout out to the MEDC here in Michigan. They sponsored that, so thank you.
Yeah.
The results were really quite impressive. It was $289 million, I believe, amongst 9 of the tribes throughout Michigan. Pretty much all of the prosperity zones. I don't think everyone was touched, but almost all of them. Really good data came out of that, and even things that surprised, I think, the participants. And to the use, we used it to measure our own, where we're at, talk to our tribal leadership and tribal membership about where we're at and how we're, doing things the same or different as other tribes are doing. And then we also used it for business partners because some business partners really didn't look at tribes as legitimate business partners. They wanted maybe funding that they thought the tribes could help them with, but they didn't really think that they could be a part of it. So all of these things and the communities in which we operate, it just informed and helped educate the people in those communities. So a lot of benefit out of that. I was really happy with the results. And then this year, we did 2024 results, so 5 years later. And want to give a shout out to Jesse Goldner and to Heather DePasty and Diami Harris, who are all NHBP tribal members, who really led this study this year. And we got all 12 tribes to participate, which was a huge thing. I was so happy.
Huge win.
Yeah, and we had some great results where if you normalize the data, and I've got the numbers so I don't get it wrong, if you normalize the data from 2019 when 9 tribes participated, if you normalize that to as if 12 tribes participated, those numbers were $453 million in total economic impact in 2019. So that's huge.
Yeah.
But fast forward 5 years and think what's happened in 5 years. We'd had COVID, we've had all of these things, but still the economic impact is $1.2 billion.
That's incredible.
5 years later.
More than double.
Yeah.
Amazing.
Yeah. So again, just getting quantitative data to discuss economic development in tribes was really important. So we were glad we could do that.
Well, data sovereignty is an important
Yes.
topic right now in Indian country, and collecting your own data and controlling it. In this exercise, part of what I'm hearing when you talk about it is it kind of makes you do that. You may or may not be really tracking every enterprise in a certain way. You might not be tracking every governmental service in a certain way, but doing these kinds of things provide some impetus to collect the information, think about it analytically, put it in a common format with other tribes. If you got this collaborative approach, think about how you're going to use it. Like that alone is a great exercise, I think, in tribal governance and just sovereign community building.
And I'm going to also give a shout out to A Local, which is a tribally owned company that did the data analysis for us. And to data sovereignty, there was some concern when we did it the first time and this time too. Is our data secure? Is our data going to be confidential? We don't want this study to say, oh, this tribe is doing way better than this tribe. It's a collective reporting. So they did the data analysis for us and again, great results.
And collected it anonymously, right?
Correct.
So they couldn't, yeah. Shout out to the MEDC as well for that one because they sponsored the 2024 one as well.
Yes.
So
Yes.
doing great work. Well, Eric, I know you touched on it a little bit already, but when we say economic impact in a study like this, what is considered, that's far more than just revenue generation, right? What are we talking about when we say economic impact?
The reporting often has measures like employment, wages paid, taxes paid. There's this notion that tribes are exempt from taxes. You might have had some potential business partners who might want to partner with you because of that notion, right?
Yep.
But think about all those wages you pay. Nearly every one of them is subject to federal taxes, state taxes, sales taxes. Someone buys a car, at least in Massachusetts, there's an excise tax. So all that activity actually creates a lot of revenues for non-native jurisdictions around you, federal, state, municipal. Think about the property taxes that all those new employees are paying on their new homes. And if you're not in a major urban center that's already attracting people, think about just how important that is to have $1 billion of economic activity happening in more rural places and those job prospects. Some of that knowing what you're doing, thinking that tribes are just about gaming. Yeah. Even, I'm sure, your tribal citizenship at the tribal level does not necessarily follow the diversification efforts of the tribe every day.
We were surprised. We had comments like that, like, well, I didn't know our tribe was doing that.
Right.
Even their own tribal members, but communities certainly.
And if you want your tribal citizens to build their own capacity by having greater access to a wider array of jobs, they're not necessarily researching the local job market every week. So there's some outreach that's probably placed upon you. Human resources from a tribal enterprise perspective is probably not all, well, we have a website and we post jobs.
Right.
Just presuming that will attract the kind of people you want, particularly if you want to create pathways for prosperity for tribal citizens, takes a lot more. And so I think the human resource toolkit for just the business that's based in downtown Boston is quite a bit different from a diversified portfolio of enterprises in the non-gaming space, based in Grand Rapids, but with this desire to not only be profitable, but to provide lots of tribal employment over the decades to come. That's a whole different intersection of business with governmental priority setting.
Yeah, and that goes back to the cultural aspect of it. yeah, we want successful businesses, but we also want to do these things, take care of our tribal members, be good community partners, offer opportunities for board seats and that kind of thing. There's just a whole other category of benefits that tribal economic development offers.
Yeah, and I think because gaming was pushed and continues to be pushed so hard, right, there tends to be a little bit of negative stigma when it comes to tribes and even tribal businesses, because I think, growing up here, and when I would tell people I was Native, it was always then immediately reverted back to the casino with some sort of negative connotation, right? And so I think a study like this economic impact study really shows not just the impact that tribes are having in their own communities, but the desire and the want for those same tribes to positively impact the communities within which they sit, particularly in a state like Michigan, right, where we have checkerboard reservations. It's not like it's just a huge landmass that these tribes have. They are embedded within communities within the state of Michigan, right? And so a study like this, I think, is so important to really reflect that tribes are not just interested in investing in their own communities. They're interested in, what's that saying, when the tide rises, all the ships do, right? Like that is what this economic impact study shows. We're not just here for the tribe's benefit. We're here to create a benefit for the entire community, both tribal and non-tribal.
Yeah, we run a program that started in 99, I think was our first award year, that honors good tribal governance initiatives in all sort of aspects of governance, partly because of exactly what you're talking about. A lot of press focuses on negative things in one way or another. It's high diabetes rates, it's low educational attainment, it's a gaming monopoly, which is not accurate, but that's sort of how it's presented, or at least how the public perceives it. And so one of the things that we started in the late 90s was this, hey, tribes are doing so many good things, from improving the water quality on their reservations, to running regional transportation networks, to just everything. My own tribe has a program that helps tribal employees, if their kids are kind of ill, lots of time, like a little ill, like can't go to school but not seriously sick. A lot of times that has effects throughout the family, like well, the parents can't go to work because kid can't go to school, so I got to stay home and miss work. And we have a lot of employees, and hey, we've got, some resources. Let's prioritize having our employees be able to come to work. And so there's a whole mechanism by which the kids can be looked after that keeps the absenteeism rate of the tribal employees. I mean, how cool is that?
Yeah, that's awesome.
Sounds very mundane, but takes...
But it'll make a huge difference to those employees, absolutely. Whether they're tribal or not, that'll make a huge difference to those employees.
Tribes tend to employ a lot of neighboring non-native people. Yeah. There's massive positive impact that tribes are making, particularly in more remote places, in the countryside, little towns. Yeah. Tribes have become the regional economic powers in these places where farming has gotten more commercial or older industries have fallen by the wayside. Non-native communities would be wise to celebrate and embrace the tribal successes that are happening near them, because think about what that $1.2 billion of annual impact means for non-native workers.
This study highlighted that one of the Upper Peninsula tribes is the largest employer in that area. So to your point, kind of a remote area, but they employ a lot of people in that area. So communities are impacted positively. Relationships, comes to be more of an understanding about what tribes do and their culture, and so a lot of positives come out.
Right, and brain drain is a real problem in rural America for native and non-native communities. But given the history of land, the tribe's not going anywhere. Right, and so trying every mechanism you can put into play to keep your best and brightest around. Provide them a viable and prosperous future they can come back to if they want to. That's really key.
That even plays into our acquisition strategy, because we'll have companies that the founder has built up this company, they feel close to the families that are employed there, and when we talk to them about being owner in perpetuity, not going to turn around and sell it in 3 to 5 years, they will actually factor that into their sales decision or which buyer that they end up going with. And some of them do. They take a lower offer. We're always reasonable, but they might take a lower offer because they know that we're going to keep operating the company and the community and maintain those jobs. And we laugh and we say others say they wanted to preserve their legacy, but when they get a higher price, they just buy a boat and call it legacy.
There you go. Exactly. Well, and the same as we've even seen on the federal side too, right? We've got large prime contractors that when they hear, hey, we're here for the next 7 generations, we abide by the 7 grandfather teachings, there's a draw to that, and that I know these people are not just going to come do the job and leave. They're going to come and they're going to be here because they care about this job, this contract, whatever, not just for them sitting in these seats right now, but for the next 7 generations. And that gives them a sense of comfort knowing that, hey, this entity is here to partner with us for the long haul. So I think it certainly has an impact, not just on acquisition strategy too, but even just contracting in general.
And there's a connection among employees, among our customers. They can see the impact that doing business with us has on the tribe. It's not the profits are going back to some faceless shareholders or whatever. They can really see that they're making a difference in the tribal community and the communities in which they operate.
Absolutely. So I believe, Deidre, correct me if I'm wrong, that economic impact study can be found on our website?
Yes, it can.
Awesome. Yes. So let's say a tribe goes and gets it and reads it. How do they use it?
Like I said, we've used it for measuring our own success. We've used it in talking to business partners to say, look, we've done these things, and tribes in general have done these things. We've used it with our legislative bodies, both state and federal. Governor Gretchen Whitmer put a quote in there, too, about the benefit in all communities that tribal businesses have.
It's got to be appealing. I don't know if you've exactly said it this way, but you can go out to the world and go, look at all this growth. Don't you want to be part of this? I mean, from the business person's side, in a world where people are concerned about supply chain problems and stagflation and changing federal policies and all of this,
all the things,
we are powering forward. And
most of those growth numbers from 2019 to 2024 are in the 20 to 30% growth. I'm not sure that other businesses could say that. I haven't done the research, but that seems pretty impressive to me.
Absolutely.
Particularly right over the pandemic. I mean, there were a couple of years there where there was a lot of uncertainty and different industries were
and
really
struggling.
Everybody
was just kind of paused and
But what a great example to show what diversification does for you during a time period where there was so much stagnation because nothing was happening.
Yeah. In our tribe, the casino got shut down, like I think all of them did across the nation, and none of our companies got shut down. They were all considered essential. So we were very young then, so we weren't contributing a lot to the revenue, but it was just a really good example of why it's important to diversify.
Great case study, for sure. Eric, so moving forward, how would, let's say a tribe downloads this, reads through it, how could they use it to help them make decisions moving forward on how they want to conduct their economic development?
Well, one thing I've found is that everyone here is quite open to working with other tribes, to share lessons, share best practices. I'm quite sure that the people involved in getting the study done, including on the analytical side, would love to hear from every tribe out there if individually or collectively they'd like a similar study.
Yeah.
I think it has some great takeaways in terms of like how the tribes here in Michigan are thinking about their diversification plans and how those impacts, even in industries that don't have necessarily as high a profit margin as gaming, they can make a real difference.
Yeah. Deidre, any last thoughts on the impact study?
I just can't stress the importance of diversification. And again, that doesn't look the same from tribe to tribe, and there are levels of ability to commit to it, but I think it's so important to get started. I just really think it's so important to get started. And then cooperation amongst the tribes. I think this is one of the shining successes of this study, is just to having all 12 tribes cooperate and look at what we've accomplished together.
Yeah, absolutely. Eric, how about you? Any takeaways from the impact study or Waséyabek's partnership with Harvard on some of the things that we've done?
Sure. No, I hope our partnership continues for a long time because the growth story here is truly amazing. It's one part of this collaborative effort that is reflected in that study, but it's been a great on-the-ground example, and having people willing to come all the way to Cambridge in person, speak to our students in person, work with our students through the spring semester on a number of things like workforce development or best practices in partnering with tribal enterprises. It's a real great opportunity on the learning side and a very practical set of like professional connections that our students can make. Just been, from my perspective, a complete win for everyone.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think I can speak for Deidre when I say certainly we feel that on the Waséyabek side, that's for sure. So
it's really been it's been an honor to come and lecture and to just talk with the students and yourself and hear about other tribes' experiences too. It helps us understand.
Definitely, which is kind of the point of why we put this podcast together, right?
Yeah,
so we could collaborate and be a lessons learned for other folks. So, well, Eric, thanks so much for coming. We look forward to having you back again. In fact, part of the collaboration that we've been talking about is some work that you guys did for us at Waséyabek. So we're going to have one of your students on our next episode with you. So we're looking forward to having you back.
Yeah, so pleased to be here. Looking forward to the next one and continuing the collaboration with other students down the road also.
Yes,
thank you.
Definitely.
Absolutely. And thank you all for listening. If you enjoyed this episode of Tribal Economic Development, please make sure to leave us a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. Additionally, if you have any questions or topics that you'd like us to cover in future podcast episodes, we do have a place on our website that you can leave us a comment or feedback. That's just waséyabek.com/podcast. We'd love to hear from you. Thanks.